The crimson lightning split the alien sky as Nova Chen gripped the controls of her failing research vessel. Warning lights flashed across every surface of the small cockpit, while the ship's computer announced in its set, maddeningly calm voice that hull integrity was at 30% and dropping fast. "Come on, hold together," she whispered, her knuckles white against the steering column. The planet below looked hostile, all jagged mountains and swirling dust storms. But it was better than burning up in the atmosphere. She'd been studying alien reproductive cycles for 5 years. But she'd never expected to become part of a survival story herself. The ship hit the ground hard, bouncing twice before sliding to a stop against a rocky outcropping. Nova's head snapped forward, her safety harness digging into her shoulders as everything went dark. When she woke up, smoke was filling the cockpit and her left arm throbbed with sharp pain. She stumbled out of the wreckage into the howling wind. The air was thin but breathable, thank the stars, though it carried a strange metallic taste. Her emergency kit had survived the crash, along with her portable scanner and most of her research data. But her communication array was completely destroyed, and the nearest human outpost was light years away. As she took stock of her injuries, shadow fell across her. Nova looked up to see a figure approaching through the dust storm. At first she thought it might be human, but as it drew closer, she realized her mistake. The being was tall and lean, with skin that seemed to shimmer between deep blue and silver. Depending on how the light caught it, his face was angular but somehow familiar. With large eyes that glowed softly in the dim light, the alien stopped a few feet away and spoke in a language. It sounded like music mixed with thunder. When Nova shook her head to indicate she didn't understand, it switched to heavily accented but understandable English. "You are injured," the being said, its voice deep and resonant. "This storm will not pass for many hours. You must come with me to shelter." Her training had taught her to be cautious around unknown species. But her scanner showed no weapons on the alien, and truthfully, she had no other options. "My name is Nova," she said, shouldering her pack. "What do you call yourself?" "I am Kalen of the Zintheri," he replied, already turning toward what looked like a solid cliff face. "We must hurry." As they walked, Nova noticed that Kalen moved with an unusual grace, as if he were dancing rather than walking. His clothing appeared to be made from some kind of adaptive material that shifted with his movements. When they reached the cliff, he pressed his palm against what looked like solid rock, and a doorway materialized. "An old mining facility," Kalen explained as they stepped inside. "Abandoned when this world's resources were depleted. The power still functions, and it will protect us from the storms." The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with clean air and gentle lighting that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Nova set down her pack and winced as the movement jarred her injured arm. "You require medical attention," Kalen observed, moving closer to examine her injury. His touch was gentle as he rolled up her sleeve, but Nova noticed his breathing had changed slightly. "It's just a sprain," she said, though she was acutely aware of how close he was standing. There was something about his presence that made her feel both safe and strangely alert. "I have medical supplies in my kit." Kalen nodded and stepped back, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than seemed necessary. "I will prepare food while you tend to your injury. The storm may last for several days." As Nova bandaged her arm, she watched Kalen move around the facility's small living area. He seemed to know his way around, suggesting he'd been here for some time, but why was a Zenthari warrior alone on this desolate planet? And why did she feel such a strong pull toward him, despite barely knowing him? She was about to ask when Kalen suddenly stiffened, his head turning toward the entrance they'd come through. His eyes had begun to glow brighter, and she could see tension in every line of his body. "What is it?" Nova whispered. "Something approaches," Kalen replied, his voice carrying a new edge. "Stay behind me." The facility's sensors detected nothing, but Kellen's agitation was unmistakable. He paced the length of the main room like a caged animal, stopping frequently to listen to sounds Nova couldn't hear. His skin had darkened to a deeper blue, and she noticed that his breathing had become more controlled, almost ritualistic. "Sensors show we're alone," Nova said, checking her portable scanner for the third time. Maybe it was just the wind. Kalen turned to her, and and she was startled by the intensity in his glowing eyes. "Your human technology cannot detect everything," he said. "My people have other ways of sensing danger." Nova had been studying alien species long enough to recognize the signs of biological stress responses. McKellen's behavior seemed different. Somehow, more focused, more purposeful. She consulted her research notes on the Zenthari, trying to remember what she'd learned about their social behaviors. The Zenthari were known as fierce warriors and explorers, but they were also intensely loyal to their chosen companions. According to her data, they formed deep bonds with other beings during times of crisis, but the details were frustratingly vague. Most human contact with the Zenthari had been brief and formal. "Kaylin," she said gently, "how long have you been alone on this planet?" Stopped pacing and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "For months, 7 days," he said without hesitation. "My ship was damaged in a battle with pirates. I came here to make repairs, but the parts I need are not available. That's a long time to be isolated," Nova observed. She'd noticed that he seemed to be struggling with something internal, some kind of conflict that made him restless and hyper-aware of their surroundings. "My people are not meant for solitude," Kaylin admitted, "especially not during, ... double quotes he trailed off, turning away from her.
During what?
Nova pressed gently. Kaylin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "During the season of bonding, comes every few years, when we must choose a companion or risk losing ourselves to isolation madness." Nova felt her pulse quicken as the pieces began to fall into place. She'd read about similar cycles in other species, but she'd never encountered one firsthand. "And this season is happening now. Began 3 days ago," Kaylin said, still not looking at her. "I have been fighting it, but your presence makes it ... more difficult." Danding washed over Nova like a cold wave. The protective behavior, the heightened awareness, the way he seemed drawn to her, yet kept trying to maintain distance. Kaylin wasn't just being cautious about potential dangers outside the facility. He was trying to protect her from himself. "Is that why you seem so tense?" she asked. "Because your instincts are telling you to bond with me?" Kaylin finally turned to face her, and she could see the internal struggle written across his features. "The bonding season makes us intensely protective of those we care about. You become ... possessive, territorial. It is not something to be taken lightly, but you're fighting it," Nova said. "I am trying," Kaylin replied. "But each moment we spend together makes it harder. Your scent, your voice, the way you move when you think you are unobserved. Everything about you calls to something in me that I am struggling to control." Nova felt heat rise in her cheeks at his words. She'd been aware of the growing attraction between them, but hearing him articulate it so directly made her heart race. "What happens if you stop fighting it?" Kellen's eyes flashed brighter. "And I will claim you as my bondmate, and nothing in the universe will be able to separate us." "But you are human, Nova. You did not choose this. Would it not be fair to trap you with alien instincts you cannot understand?" Before Nova could respond, the facility's lights flickered and a low alarm began to sound. The main console lit up, with warning messages in several languages, including Standard English, external breach detected, sealing emergency bulkheads. Kaylin moved immediately to Nova's side, his body positioned between her and the sealed entrance. His protective instincts had taken over completely, and she could see the change in his posture, his breathing even. The way he held his hands, he was ready for battle. "What does this mean?" Nova asked, though she suspected she already knew. "We are trapped," Kaylin said simply. "The facility has gone into lockdown mode. Cannot leave until the external threat passes." The lockdown stretched into its second day, and Nova found herself watching Kaylin with growing fascination. Despite his struggle with his biological imperatives, he was unfailingly considerate, always ensuring she had the best food, the most comfortable sleeping arrangements, and first access to the facility's single refresher unit. She'd set up her portable lab in the facility's former communications room, using her research equipment to analyze samples of the planet's unique flora that Kaylin had collected during his months alone. Working helped keep her mind off their situation, though she was increasingly aware of his presence whenever he moved through the facility. "These plants have remarkable properties," Nova said, as Kalen brought her another cup of the tea-like beverage he'd been preparing from local vegetation. The cellular structure suggests they can survive in almost any environment. Kalen settled into the chair beside her workstation, closer than strictly necessary, but not close enough to make her uncomfortable. My people have a saying, he said. Life finds a way to flourish, even in the harshest places. Is that why you came out here alone? Nova asked. To find ways to flourish? Kalen was quiet for a moment, staring at the sample slides under her microscope. I was part of an exploration fleet, he said finally. We were mapping new trade routes when pirates attacked. My ship was damaged, and I was separated from my squad. I came here to make repairs and wait for rescue. No one came, Nova guessed. The Zenthari do not abandon their warriors lightly, Kalen said. But this sector is vast and dangerous. Search parties must be careful not to become victims themselves. Nova could hear the loneliness in his voice, despite his attempt to sound. Matter of fact, 4 months of isolation would be difficult for any social species. But for someone going through a bonding season, it must have been torture. Tell me about your people, she said, closing her research notes and giving him her full attention. What is Zenthari culture like? Kellen's eyes brightened, and for the first time since she'd met him, he seemed to relax completely. Of crystal cities that grew from living stone, of art forms that used light and sound to create beauty that could bring listeners to tears, of family bonds that lasted centuries, and friendships that transcended individual lifetimes. It sounds beautiful, Nova said when he paused, and very different from human culture. Tell me about your world, Kalen requested. What drives humans to explore the stars? Nova found herself sharing more than she'd intended, she told him. About growing up on a space station, it's about her fascination with the diversity of life in the galaxy, about her dream of bridging the gaps between species through scientific understanding. I became a xenobiologist because I believe that understanding leads to acceptance, she said. The more we know about each other, the less we have to fear. Kalen leaned forward slightly, his attention completely focused on her words. And what do you make of what you have learned about me? The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Nova could feel the weight of his gaze, the careful control he was maintaining over himself. In her own growing attraction to this alien warrior who treated her with such gentleness despite the storm raging inside him, I think, Nova said slowly, that you are fighting very hard to protect me from something you believe I cannot handle. But I also think you might be underestimating both of us. Kellen's eyes flashed, and she saw his control waver for just a moment. Nova, you do not understand what you are suggesting. Then explain it to me, she said, reaching out to touch his hand. The contact sent a jolt of warmth up her arm, and she saw Kellen's pupils dilate in response. I'm a scientist, Kalen. I study this kind of thing for a living. Help me understand. For a long moment, they sat in silence, her small human hand covering his larger alien one. Nova could feel his pulse through his skin, fast and strong, and the slight tremor that ran through him at her touch.
Oh.
The bonding season affects every aspect of our being, Kalen said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Physical, mental, emotional. When a Zenthari chooses a bondmate, it is permanent, irreversible. We become two parts of a single whole. And you're afraid I might not want that, Nova said. I am afraid, Kalen admitted, that you might want it for the wrong reasons. The isolation, the danger, the circumstances of our meeting. How can you know what you truly feel? Nova squeezed his hand gently. How does anyone ever know? Human relationships don't come with guarantees either. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. The breaking point on the third morning of their lockdown, Nova woke to find Kalen standing at the sealed entrance, his entire body rigid with tension. His skin had darkened to an almost midnight blue, and she could see the muscles in his back straining against his adaptive clothing. Kalen, she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and she was shocked by the change in his appearance. His eyes were now glowing so brightly they cast shadows on the walls, and his breathing was deep and controlled in a way that suggested he was using every ounce of his willpower to maintain composure. They are here, he said simply.
Who?
Nova asked, though the facility's proximity alarms were already providing the answer. Red lights flashed across every surface. She could hear the distant sound of something heavy moving across the planet's rocky surface. Scavengers, Kalen said, moving to the facility's weapon locker. Pirates who strip abandoned settlements for anything valuable. I had hoped the storm would keep them away. Nova grabbed her scanner and ran a quick sweep of the area outside. I'm reading at least 6 life signs, she reported. They're using some kind of powered armor, and they're armed. Kalen pulled a sleek energy weapon from the locker and checked its charge. His movements were fluid and precise, those of a trained warrior, but Nova could see the barely contained violence in every gesture. The bonding season had pushed him to the edge, and the threat to her safety was about to push him over it. The facility's defenses will hold them for a while, he said, but not indefinitely. When they breach the entrance, you must stay behind me. Do you understand? Kalen. Wait, Nova said, catching his arm as he moved toward the control console. You're not thinking clearly. The bonding season is affecting your judgment. He turned to her, and for a moment she saw not the gentle alien who had been caring for her, but a predator whose mate was being threatened.
How my...
My judgment is perfectly clear, he said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. You are mine to protect. Nothing else matters. The possessive tone in his voice sent a shiver down Nova's spine, but not entirely from fear. There was something primitive and powerful in his declaration that called to something equally basic in her own nature. I'm not just something to be protected, she said, though her voice was softer than she'd intended. I'm a person with my own choices to make. Kellen's expression softened slightly, and she saw him struggle to regain control of himself. All right, he said. Forgive me. The bonding instincts make it difficult to think of anything except keeping you safe. The facility shuddered as something powerful struck the outer barrier. Through the walls, they could hear voices shouting, in a harsh alien language, followed by the whine of energy weapons charging up. They're trying to blast their way in, Nova said, reading the facility's status displays. How long do we have? Perhaps an hour, Kalen replied, checking his weapon again. Maybe less. Nova made a decision that surprised even her. She crossed to where Kalen stood and reached up to touch his face, feeling the unusual texture of his skin beneath her fingers. His eyes widened at the contact, and she felt the tremor that ran through him. If we might not survive this, she said then, I want you to know something. What I feel for you isn't just fear or gratitude or circumstances. It's real. Kellen's control finally snapped. He pulled her against him, his alien strength careful but unmistakable, and claimed her mouth in a kiss that tasted of starlight and storm winds. Nova felt herself melt into his embrace, her body responding to his in ways that had nothing to do with science or logic. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Kellen's eyes were blazing with an inner fire, and Nova could feel the change in him, the way his bonding instincts had locked onto her completely and irrevocably. Nova, he breathed against her ear, you do not know what you have done. I know exactly what I've done, she whispered back, surprising herself with her boldness. I've chosen you too. The facility shook again, more violently this time. Whatever. The scavengers were using. It was working. But Nova found she wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever happened next, she would face it with Kalen at her side. New Beginnings, the battle was swift and decisive. When the scavengers finally breached the facility's outer defenses, they found themselves facing not a stranded human scientist, but a fully bonded Zenthari warrior defending his chosen mate. Moved through their ranks like a force of nature, his enhanced strength and speed making their powered armor seem clumsy and slow by comparison, Nova watched from the secure control room, coordinating their defense through the facility's remaining automated systems while Kalan fought. She found herself able to anticipate his movements, to provide cover and support, as if they had been fighting together for years instead of minutes. The bond between them had created a connection that went deeper than mere attraction or compatibility. When the last scavenger fled back to their ship, Kalen returned to Nova with his alien eyes still blazing but his expression tender. Are you injured? He asked, his hands moving over her gently. checking for wounds. "I'm fine," she assured him, catching his hands in hers. "But you were incredible out there. I've never seen anything like it. The bond gives us strength when protecting our mates," Kalen explained, pulling her into his arms. "Just as your presence gave me focus and clarity I had not felt in months." They were interrupted by a sound neither had expected to hear again, the hum of an approaching spacecraft. Through the facility's restored viewports, they could see a sleek vessel settling onto the rocky ground outside. "Xanthari design," Kalen said with surprise. "It seems my people have finally found me." The rescue ship's captain was a female Xanthari, named Valara, who greeted Kalen with obvious relief and Nova with curious but respectful interest. When Kalen explained what had happened during his isolation, including his bonding with Nova, Valara's response surprised them both. "The Council has been hoping for successful human-Xanthari bonding," she said. "There have been theoretical discussions for years, but no practical examples. You two may have just opened a new chapter in interspecies relations." "What does that mean for us?" Nova asked, still feeling overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her life. "It means," Valara said with what Nova was learning to recognize as a Xanthari smile, "that you have some very interesting options ahead of you." Months later, Nova stood in the observation deck of the newly established research station orbiting the planet where she and Kalen had first met. The facility was a joint human-Xanthari venture, combining the best of both species' technologies to study the unique ecosystem they had discovered. Kalen joined her at the viewport, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. Her bond had only grown stronger over the months, creating a partnership that was both personal and professional.
Oh.
Nova's research had benefited enormously from Kellen's warrior's instincts and his people's deep understanding of biological adaptation. "The first batch of research applications came in today," Nova said, leaning back against his chest. "Scientists from 17 different species want to study here." "And what did you tell them?" Kalen asked, his breath warm against her ear. "I told them we'd consider their applications," Nova said with a smile. "But they'll have to follow our rules. No interference with the local ecosystem, no exploitation of resources, and absolutely no threatening the local population." "Which would be us," Kalen observed with amusement. Nova said, turning in his arms to face him. "Think you can handle being part of a scientific colony?" Kellen's eyes glowed softly as he looked down at her. "As long as you are here, I can handle anything the universe chooses to throw at us." Nova stood on her toes to kiss him, marveling once again at how perfectly they fit together despite their different origins. The bond between them had taught her that love didn't require sameness, only understanding and the willingness to grow together. Outside their viewport, the alien sun set behind the planet's mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was beautiful, wild, and full of possibilities, just like the future they were building together. And as Nova felt Kellen's arms tighten around her and heard the gentle hum of their research station coming to life around them, she knew that sometimes the best discoveries were the ones you never expected to make. Their story was just beginning. But it was already proving that the universe's greatest treasures weren't found in distant stars or ancient ruins. Sometimes they were found in the courage to trust someone completely different from yourself, and in the willingness to let that trust transform you both.